Well, crap, it's been a bit, hasn't it? Think I only missed last week, all things considered, so please don't hang me or anything. Lots of personal things happened, including a hospital stay and surgery. So we're back now, working on bringing you some nice content. That being said, we need to do something big.
Yes!
Got something in mind, ACD?
Maybe.
Is it going to anger the Christians?
Keep going.
Anger them a lot?
Absolutely!
How about the Crucifixion?
Nailed it like the fucking Romans!
Yeesh! Welcome to a long-awaited Faith Around and Find Out Friday. As you heard, we're going to be having a look at what the Bible says about the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Now, I've looked over this, and there are several similarities between the four Gospels. The question we're going to be asking is, are they historically accurate?
No.
Spoilers.
Okay, fine.
So, the reason we're going to be doing this is because I want to touch more on what the New Testament has to say, since we did both the birth and the resurrection of the guy, and the only thing we can say is historically accurate is that someone was crucified that gained a following later on. It only makes sense that the Christians would think that the person in history is Jesus himself, and frankly, I'm inclined to agree. I personally believe that someone named Jesus actually lived back then, and he was crucified for saying he was the Son of God. I just don't think he was. I think the stories about him are greatly exaggerated, and he was just a preacher and a man of medicine. Add those together, and you get a miracle worker back in those days. But realistically, they should match up, right? This is supposed to be the infallible Word of God. The writers screwed the pooch twice so far with the birth and the resurrection, and this is the moment where Jesus sacrifices himself on the cross to forgive the sins of the world. The writers wouldn't completely fuck this up, right?
Let's get it started!
Starting with the book of Matthew, chapter 27, in summary, it says this. Early in the morning, the head priests and elders made plans to have Jesus killed. They bound him and brought him to Pilate. Judas, his betrayer, showed remorse and tried to give the reward money back to the priests. They refused it. Judas threw the money into the temple and hung himself. The church then used the money to buy land for a graveyard. Jesus stood before Pilate, who asked him if he was the king of the Jews. Jesus replied, "You have said so." But only to Pilate and not to the accusations of the priests, nor did he reply to any of the charges against him. Pilate actually had two Jesuses that day and asked the crowd which should be released. The priests and elders had the crowd ask for Jesus Barabbas. Pilate asked what to do with Jesus the Messiah, and the crowd said to crucify him. Then he asked what the crime was. The crowd just demanded crucifixion. Pilate washed his hands and declared he will not take responsibility and the actions would be on the crowd. The crowd said, "His blood is on us and our children." Barabbas was released and Jesus was then flogged and handed over to be killed. The soldiers that took him took his clothes, put a scarlet robe and thorn crown on him, gave him a staff and mocked him as King of the Jews. They then took the staff and beat Jesus with it, taking the scarlet robe off of him and putting his clothes back on. Simon was tasked with carrying Jesus' cross up to Golgotha. They offered Jesus wine mixed with gall, which Jesus refused after tasting it. They crucified him and divided up his clothes by casting lots. Above his head was placed a sign as charge, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." Two men were put up with Jesus as rebels, and people again mocked him, telling them he is the Son of God just to come down. For 3 hours, darkness covered the area starting at noon. At about 3 p.m., Jesus cried, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Someone tried giving Jesus wine on a sponge. Jesus cried out one more time and died. There was an earthquake, the temple curtain was torn in the quake, and the dead were raised in a ghost march into town. Some centurion claimed, "Surely this was the Son of God." while many women watched from a distance, including Mary Magdalene, Mary mother of James and Joseph, and Mary mother of Zebedee's sons. From there, Jesus is buried in a tomb, and guards are appointed at the tomb with a seal on it. And that's the end of chapter 27 in the Gospel of Matthew. ACD, this is going to take a while, isn't it?
Maybe.
Why are we doing this again?
Why are you so lame?
Right. On to what it says in Mark. Early in the morning, the priests and elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin made their plans, bound Jesus, and led him away, handing him over to Pilate. Pilate asked if Jesus is king of the Jews. Jesus said, "You have said so." The accusations are laid down. Jesus stays silent. The Jesus versus Barabbas is put up, with Pilate asking the crowd wants Jesus to be released, knowing it was of self-interest the priests handed over Jesus. The priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. Pilate asked, "What should we do with Jesus?" The crowd says, "Crucify him." "What crime has he committed?" And the crowd just says, "Crucify him." Appeasing the crowd, Barabbas is released, Jesus is flogged and handed over to be crucified. I already see some differences.
Keep going.
Anyway, the soldiers that took Jesus took his clothes, put a purple robe and thorn crown on him, and mocked him as king of the Jews. They struck him with a staff and spit on him, falling to their knees and mocking him again. They took off the purple robe and put his own clothes back on and led him out to be crucified. Simon was taken and made to carry Jesus' cross up to Golgotha, and Jesus was offered wine mixed with myrrh, which Jesus refused outright. They crucified him, dividing up his clothes by casting lots at 9 in the morning. 2 rebels were put up next to him, flanking him. The crowd then mocked him to come down from the cross, and the 2 rebels also mocked Jesus as well. At noon, darkness fell on the area for 3 hours when Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Someone tried to give him wine vinegar on a sponge, and Jesus died with a loud scream. The curtain of the temple was torn from top to bottom, and the centurion said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Several women watched from a distance, including Mary Magdalene, Mary mother of James the younger, and Joseph, and Salome, along with several others women that followed Jesus and tended to his needs.
So, what do you think?
Well, there are several differences between the two. The quotes are different. Jesus wasn't given a staff. There was no earthquake. Pilate never offered Barabbas to be released in Mark. The crowd asked for him by name instead. In Matthew, it was wine on the sponge. Mark, it was wine vinegar. The drink the guards offered Jesus was mixed with myrrh and not bile like in Mark. The robe in Matthew was scarlet red, and in Mark it was purple. So we have some significant differences. Any one of those could be dismissed, but altogether it's just not right. ACD, you picked out a really good one so far. Good job.
Oh, you dirty bitch, work the shaft.
There you go, making things uncomfortable again.
Sorry if that's weird.
Shall we continue with Luke?
Well, my boner's gone.
Right. I'm going to take that as a yes. So in Luke, the events we've been going over actually start the chapter before in 22 and continue into 23 instead of being in the same chapter. At daybreak, the council of elders bring Jesus before them and order him to tell them if he is the Messiah. Jesus responds, saying they would not believe him if they told him anyway. The elders asked again, "Are you then the Son of God?" Jesus replied, "You say that I am." The elders took that as a confession and led him off to Pilate. Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "You have said so." Then Pilate said he has no basis to punish Jesus. The elders say he is stirring up people in Judea by his teaching. Pilate then asked where Jesus was from and found out he was from Galilee. This was Herod's jurisdiction, and Jesus was sent to King Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at the time. Time out. Just for clarity, didn't one of the Gospels about Jesus' birth mention Herod dying when Jesus was young?
Yes! Keep going.
Okay, I just thought that was significant there. So, Herod saw Jesus and was pleased to see him, in fact. What the fuck is going on here?
Shut up! Shut up!
Okay, fine. I just remember Herod wanted to kill Jesus, and now he's all buddy-buddy with him.
Jesus fucking Christ!
Fine then, but we'll just ignore the fuck up between Matthew and John.
Yes! Oh, bravo! Bravo!
Smartass. Anyway, so Herod is evidently cool with Jesus now and wants to see him perform some sort of a sign. Herod asks Jesus many questions, and Jesus keeps his mouth shut. This pisses Herod off, and they dressed Jesus in a robe and pushed him off to Pilate again after some vicious mockery. Pilate said to the chief priests and the people that he has not found any basis for the charges against Jesus, nor has Herod. Pilate said he would release Jesus, and the crowd asked for not him, but Barabbas instead. Pilate wanted to release Jesus, and the crowd chanted, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate asked a third time, asking the crime committed, but the crowd insisted Jesus be crucified instead. Simon was pulled and made to carry Jesus' cross behind Jesus. A large number of women followed closely on the way. Jesus gave them a speech in essence for them to remain virgins for life. 2 other criminals were also led out for crucifixion and brought to a place called the Skull, same place as before, where Jesus was crucified with the other criminals flanking him. Jesus asked God to forgive the guards, for they know not what they do, while they are dividing up his clothes by casting lots. The crowd started mocking Jesus, telling him to come down off the cross if he is the Son of God and the Messiah. One of the criminals said if he is the Messiah, to save himself and both of them. The other criminal defended Jesus and said what they did was wrong and they are being justly punished. Then asked Jesus to remember him when he dies. Jesus replies to him that the one that defended him, that he will be with him in paradise. About noon, there starts a 3 hours of darkness. The curtain in the temple is torn in two, and Jesus shouted, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," and died. The centurion said, "Surely this was a righteous man." The people that were close by beat their chest and left, while the women that knew him watched him off in the distance.
That was a flawless presentation.
Well, yeah, but that was different than the other two as well. Actually, that was really vastly different. When I was a Catholic, I mean, this was years and years ago, but when I was a Catholic, I distinctly recall being taught Jesus was made to carry his own cross. And in fact, it's an old saying that when you have to do something yourself, you would say it's your cross to bear. So why is it 3 of the Gospels have Simon carrying the cross for Jesus? And in this one of the guys crucified with Jesus defended him while the other one stood silent or just mocked. And the one we talked about a few minutes ago had both of them taunting him. And why didn't Jesus say, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And instead he says, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And the centurion's quote is different too. This time he didn't say anything about Jesus being holy, just that he was blameless. Some of the order of events are changed. The people that were changed. Fucking Herod is alive and happy to see Jesus, when in Matthew, Herod wanted to kill him from the day he was born. And even though he was displeased, he just sends Jesus away with a robe? This entire thing is just feeling fucky.
Hold that thought.
Oh, now I'm ready to see what the last gospel says. Last but not least, the Gospel of John. Starting from chapters 18 into 19 to stay consistent, Jesus is already bound up from an incident with a high priest. The Jewish leaders took Jesus from a guy that bound him up. It's early in the morning at this point, and they take him to Pilate, and he asks what the charges are against the man. The priest said if he were not a criminal, they would not have brought Jesus to him. Pilate evidently saw this as a non-answer and told the priests to judge Jesus themselves. They refused, saying they had no right to do the punishment, and this fulfilled some prophecy. Is this why the Gospel of John exists? Prophecy fulfillment?
Maybe.
For fuck's sake.
Keep going.
Well, Pilate went back inside and took Jesus inside with him. Pilate asked if he were the king of the Jews. Jesus asked Pilate if Pilate came up with that, or did the others tell him that? Pilate sarcastically asked if he were a Jew, and the priest sent him there and then asked what Jesus did. Instead of answering normally, Jesus said his kingdom is not of this world and is from another place. Pilate says, "You are a king then." Jesus replied, "You say that I am king," and continued on that he is here to spread truth. Pilate asked rhetorically, "What is truth?" and went back out and asked the crowd if they wanted to have the King of the Jews released, and the crowd shouted that they wanted Barabbas instead. Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers put a crown of thorn on him and a purple robe to mock him as King of the Jews. Pilate again said to the crowd has no basis for charging Jesus. Pilate brought out Jesus dressed in the robe and a thorn crown and presented him to the crowd. The crowd yelled for crucifixion. But Pilate answered for them to do it. Pilate has no basis for crucifixion. The Jewish leaders said the crime was for claiming to be the Son of God. Pilate was afraid and brought Jesus back inside again. Pilate started asking Jesus questions. Jesus refused to answer until he said, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." Pilate kept trying to set Jesus free, but Jews kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar."
Ooh, drama.
Anyway, this is drawn out for a while. No joke. It's obvious from this alone that John was written to coddle up to the Romans. But there's already a bunch of fucked up discrepancies in this one. It says that others don't or outright say happen differently. It's just so bad. But anyway, in the end, Jesus handed over to be crucified. This time, Jesus took his own cross up to the skull, or Golgotha. Jesus was put up around noon with two other criminals, and a notice was put in Jesus' crime, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." The Jews protested the sign, and Pilate gave no fucks. The soldiers took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, with just his undergarment remaining, and drew lots for it, dividing the rest up. This fulfilled another prophecy or something. Nearby, the cross of Jesus was his mother, aunt, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. A soldier mocked Mary, mother of Jesus, pointing out that this was her son. Jesus said he was thirsty, and a sponge soaked with wine vinegar was offered to him. Jesus drank, said, "It is finished," and died.
It's over.
Well, yeah. That was a totally unique story that I just read. And none of them agree to the events, at all. Sure, there were some similarities, and the general theme is the same, but that's really all. So, let me just break it down for a minute. So in 3 of them, the priests gave Jesus to Pilate and judge him right there. In John, Pilate brings him inside and has a long conversation with him, then brings him back out. Brings him back in, and then brings him back out again. In one of the books, Jesus is crucified at dawn. 2 of them, he's crucified about 9 a.m., and 1 is after noon. In 3 of them, the sun goes dark, and one of them, it doesn't mention the sun going dark at all, and that's the one that happens at noon. All of them agree the tapestry is torn, but only one mentions an earthquake. One of the books says the centurion says, "Surely he was the Son of God." Another says, "Surely this man was the Son of God." A third says, "Surely this man was a righteous man." And in the last one, the centurion doesn't say shit. In 3 of the books, the women were far away, while in the 4th, they're right up there with him, and Jesus is able to address them directly. In one of them, Jesus is on the cross and said, "It is finished." Another one, he says, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And in the other 2, he says, instead of an accusation, my God, why have you forsaken me?" In one, he is given wine with bile and tasted it and then refused to drink. Another one, he's given wine with myrrh and just refuses to drink. While in the other 2, he isn't offered a drink after the accusation. And while up on the cross, at least they agree that he was given wine vinegar on a sponge, but only one says he actually had a drink, and that is John. The funny part about all this, nowhere in the 4 Gospels does it mention Jesus getting nailed to the cross. Not once. In fact, the only thing even close is wounds on Jesus' hands at the Gospel of John. No kidding, I read through the entire thing twice, just to make sure. Absolutely goose egg mention of Jesus getting nailed to the cross. The robe was different in crimson or purple, and in the 4 stories vary on whether the robe was put on him and he was handed a staff or just beaten with one. Well, one doesn't mention the staff at all. The casting of lots on Jesus' clothes was different in that they only cast lots for his underwear in one of the Gospels. Jesus carries his own cross in one, and in 3 others it's Simon. In some places it was the day of Passover, and in the others it's the day before Passover. 1 mentions an earthquake, 3 mention a tapestry getting torn, and 1 mentions neither of those events. The sign above Jesus were all slightly different too. So was it, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews," "the King of the Jews," "This is the King of the Jews," and "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews"? And only the last one got complaints about it. Some of these are completely different, and the book of John is almost entirely different, as if it were made to cater to the Romans' love of signs and prophecy from their gods. As it stands, they all seem to be an over-dramatization of what actually happened in the crucifixion of Jesus.
Nailed it like the fucking Romans!
But this is supposed to be the infallible Word of God, right? So the question you need to ask yourself is this: why would the truth need to be embellished on? And who were the Gospels really written for, if not for the purpose of telling the truth of the events? Between the 3 most important parts of the Bible, the birth, sacrificial death, and resurrection of Jesus, they are all telling completely different stories. And the crucifixion of Jesus desperately tries to paint the Romans like unwilling participants in all of this. It does not read like Jesus did this to sacrifice himself, but more that he was persecuted and the sacrifice was an excuse. If anything, between cursing God for not helping, this makes Jesus look to be nothing more than a regular man that I think he was. If he could have just let himself down as a miracle worker he claimed to be, letting oneself be killed as a human sacrifice is not the most efficient way to go about it, unless it wants to be an overly dramatic story.
Yes!
And it seems ACD's in agreement.
Bravo!
So what is similar between them? Not much, really. The church leaders wanted him punished. Pilate got a hold of him, said he wanted nothing to do with it and had nothing to do with it and wouldn't have anything to do with it, didn't want to punish him. Jesus got a colored robe at one point and did have a crown of thorns. The crowd was rallied by the priests, and Barabbas the murderer was spared. He was then crucified and a sign of charges was put up. Wine vinegar was given him on a sponge and Jesus died. Those are the only points that match up at all. Everything else, who mocked him, who shouted at him, and all the other events were embellished upon. So that's all I think happened. And I think he was tied up there for like everyone else that would get crucified normally around that time. But there would be no real reason for Pilate or anyone else to nail him up there, since Pilate didn't see a reason to do any of this in the first place. So I think we can pretty much end it here. I mean, the crucifixion is just not something that you want to say this is an actual series of events when there are 4 different series of events. Having said that, I am Corsi and this is the Fluffy Atheist. Pet those like and subscribe buttons and share this if you want to share a funny video with friends or you want to point and laugh. I'm good either way.